For an upcoming project I have a few big slabs that I of course need to flatten, and since I don't have a extremely big jointer and planer, I need a router flattening jig. I've already seen quite a few designs online, but I didn't really like them because I think they're not designed the way they should be designed. So now I'm going to build my version and then can tell you why I did what I did. Or do. Well, it's not done yet, so you'll see. Unfortunately, this project is a little too big for my workshop, so I have to do it outside, and I really don't like filming outside, especially talking to the camera outside. So I'll be narrating the most time and don't talk that much. It's a little strange, because thinking I've been making videos for more than 4 years now and talk to the camera all the time, but I'm still not over that point so that I'm able to do that in public and don't feel like a complete idiot. But anyways, let's go. I bought a whole sheet of plywood for this, and where I buy that, they have a big CNC saw, and asked them to cut 2 full-length strips off of that, and that way I know that these cuts are absolutely straight. So these are my reference edges. In the jig these guides are used like this, and that way they are already very stiff. But to stiffen it up even more, I'm screwing down one board on both guides. I drew 2 straight lines along the entire board and marked the screw positions every 20 centimeters. Then I doubled up my 2 boards and drilled holes in both pieces at the same time. The holes are slightly bigger than the screws. Next I placed a much bigger board on top and we clamped it down. I've only installed 1 screw yet. Then I rigged up this here. This front board is just so nothing can fall over. And I clamped my guide plus board to the edge of this big board, which is very straight. And so when I'm screwing this together, I don't create a bow in this direction. Looks like it worked. Next, making the 2 pieces where the long rails attach to and where the workpieces rest. And I actually used the same piece of wood that provided a straight edge just about 1 minute ago. Since I wanted something more like a beam, I ripped the board in half and glued it together again. 1 pass over the jointer provided a good glue surface. Once the glue was dry, I could further mill down the piece. Then I wanted to cross-cut both pieces at the same time. Watch what happens. The offcut got caught, and going bad would have wrecked the offcut and would have been dangerous. So, one moment where I really like to have an emergency switch and a motor brake. The long side rails will attach to these ends with these M12 bolts, and I know the side rails are 33 millimeters thick, so that means the threads will come in up to this point. Now I need to create threads in this piece of wood. I marked the right position and drilled a hole with the help of this drill guide that a kind viewer gave me through my Amazon wishlist. I drilled a little hole all the way through, and that way trapped air and excess glue can easily get out, and that makes it much more easy to insert a dowel. I will now drill one hole in each end with a little bigger than 12 millimeter up to here, then all the way through the dowel and a little further with 10 millimeter, and then I can tap the hardwood dowel with the M12 tab, and with these threads I can then clamp the guide welds really securely to the ends. If you don't believe in wooden threads, you could use a threaded insert instead, but in my experience this is so strong and will never fail. So that's the way I'm doing it.
Next I made a little router jig for making slots into the long rails.
Now lining up the jig with the mark and screwing it down. And then I can use a router with a guide bushing and route the slot.
This jig made slots that were a little wider than 12 millimeters, and my dad helped me a little bit with dust collection and compressed air.
To cut all the way through, I removed the guide bushing and installed a flush rib with a bottom bearing instead. And using the existing slot as a guide, I can cut all the way through. And there I have my finished slots.
The last thing to make is the sled that the router slides in. I made that from the leftover sheet of 15mm birch plywood. I again marked screw hole positions every 10 centimeters and of course drilled them. And I also gave the pieces a quick sanding since it's much easier when it's disassembled. Next, clamping the pieces together at the right position and screwing them together. Then the other end, and then the middle, and so on. By doing it this way, the pieces will straighten each other out.
To reduce the friction between the router carriage and the rails and make it easier to slide, I'm going to install some aluminum flat bar. The first one will be 2.5 centimeters from this edge, and I drill and countersunk the holes so that the screw heads are below the surface of the aluminum. The second strip I screw at the right position according to the distance of the long rails. And now I'm making side guides so that the carriage also can't fall off the long rails, and they're going to be screwed to some blocks. On the second block I have a little notch cut out, and I will now trim cut this so that the fit is here nice without a lot of play, but there should be some play left so I won't jam it. I think this is a good fit.
I drilled a starting hole for routing the slots and made it with 2 router bits. First the full thickness with a 60mm bit and the rest in 2 passes with a 30mm bit.
Off camera I did a few more things like rounding these corners and edges. This just makes it more comfortable to handle. And I put 1 coat of finish on it and lubricated everything. And now the router glides really easily.
Then we set up for a test in our carport. The little test piece I had is a bit boring to watch, but I'm not wasting a good big slab just for testing and video demonstration. And since the test piece was so small and light, I had to screw a board down and then hot glue it to that.
Now I've tied 2 strings across the rails. They're just secured with a bolt in the washer, and under the upper string I put a little drill bit that's about the thickness of the string. Now I look at the intersection of the strings, and the upper string, which is 1 string thickness higher than this one, should just lay on top without pushing the lower one down. And that's not the case yet, so I know the rails are not parallel yet and I have to adjust a little bit. Since the upper string pushes down in the middle, this side needs to come up. When I lift this side, the string comes off of the lower string, and now I adjust it so that it's just laying on top of it. And at that point, the rails are parallel. If I was flattening an actual big slab, I could now set the depth of cut and orientation by looking at the distance to the sled, because my router bit can only plunge to this depth. And I would do that by shimming it under its support. The bit I'm using for that is a 30mm flattening bit.
Flattening is then relatively boring. Routing, moving a bit, routing, moving a bit, and so on. But I could test a few different feed rates and spindle RPMs and see the effect on the cut quality.
That was the first pass, and that's looking really good. This worked really good.
After that little test, we already had to take the jig apart again.
Let's see how flat this is. I know my sliding table is flat, so this shouldn't rock back and forth. Pretty nice. These edges are just from the router bit coming out or going into the material. That's always looking not perfectly straight. But I can't hear any rocking, so that means this is flat. The jig is fully disassembled again. Everything of it is on my workbench right now, including all the screws and the string. And I can just put that back onto my wood storage shelf and take it out when I need it for the actual project. Now let me tell you why I built it the way I did. So what I think is really important is that the long rails are only supported on 2 points, which are my 2 screws. And therefore the rails have to be stiff enough for the job. I tested mine in the worst case situation where the supports or the contact points are on the outer ends, put the sled in the middle and then pressed in the middle of the sled. And it flexed about less than 0.5 millimeter, which is adequate enough for the job of flattening a slab. The next thing is I wanted it to be fully collapsible, and I mean, it's completely disassembled in front of me on the workbench, so that worked. And the last aspect is that it had to be independent of the ground that's used on. The only pieces that touch the ground are these. And the long guide rails are then just screwed to their side a little bit above the ground. These are not touching it. So that has the advantage that any weight workpiece, any weight slab you put on these two won't affect the precision of these parts. The other advantage is that because I have the slots, a ground that you put this on is never flat. It's always twisted or anything. But with having slots, I can make these guides parallel anyways, anywhere. And that I think is pretty cool. One thing that could be improved is a clamping system for the workpieces. But in reality, if you have to use this jig, then the workpieces are so heavy that they don't require any clamping. In my case, I have these 3 gigantic slabs which weigh about 60 kilograms each. I don't see any need of clamping. So right now, I don't think it's worth spending time on a clamping system.